There was a letter that had been lost for 10 years, and the day it reached the right hands, a broken family came together again forever. If this story has already touched your heart in the first few seconds, I invite you to subscribe. But stay, because the most important part is about to be revealed. In the mountains of northern Spain, where the wind carries the scent of pine trees and clouds tangle in the peaks like cotton caught between invisible fingers, there exists a village so small it doesn't even appear on most maps. It's called Valdecumbres, and its stone houses and slate roofs seem to have sprouted from the earth itself, as if they've been part of the landscape since time immemorial. There, where time passes with the slowness of honey falling from a spoon, where seasons are announced not by calendars but by the color of leaves and the singing of birds, lived a boy named Martín. Martín had just turned 8 years old, with hair as dark as the moonless nights of those mountains, and eyes the color of wild honey that his grandmother collected every spring. He was a quiet boy, one of those who observes more than they speak, who listens to the wind as if it tells them secrets, and who finds entire worlds in the cracks of rocks and in the flight of butterflies. He lived with his grandmother Elena in a small house at the end of the dirt road that wound from the town square until it disappeared among the centuries-old chestnut trees. The house always smelled of burning firewood and freshly baked bread, of dried lavender hanging from the ceiling beams, and that indefinable aroma of homes where many people have lived and many stories have been told. The walls were covered with photographs in dark wooden frames, some so old that the faces could barely be distinguished, faded by the passage of time, like memories that refuse to disappear completely, but can no longer be seen clearly. Elena was a 73-year-old woman, with hair as white as the snow on the peaks in winter, and hands weathered by decades of working in the garden, kneading bread and weaving blankets by the fire. Her eyes, the same honey color as her grandson's, held an ancient sadness that Martín perceived even when she smiled. It was a sadness that seemed to dwell in the deepest part of her gaze, like a permanent guest who had settled in long ago and had already become part of her. Every morning, regardless of whether the sun shone over the rye fields or rain beat against the windows with insistent fingers, Martín would get up before dawn. He dressed silently so as not to wake his grandmother, put on the rubber boots that had been his father's, and went out to the wooden porch that faced the road. There he would sit on the third step, the one that didn't creak, and wait. He waited for the mailman. He didn't know exactly why he did it, or perhaps he knew but couldn't find the words to explain it. It was something stronger than him, a need that was born somewhere in his chest and pushed him every morning toward that step worn by generations of feet that had stepped on it before his. He waited with the infinite patience of children who have learned too soon that some important things require time, a lot of time, and that waiting is sometimes the only thing they can do. The mailman of Valdecumbres was named Don Aurelio, and he was a 68-year-old man who had spent 42 years traveling the roads of those mountains with his faded blue bicycle and his brown leather bag crossed over his chest. He knew every stone of the path, every bend of the river, every family of every house. He knew who was waiting for news from emigrated children, who had lost hope of ever receiving a letter, who kept secrets that only he knew because he had carried them in sealed envelopes for decades. Don Aurelio had a face furrowed with deep wrinkles, like a map of all the roads he had traveled, of all the suns that had beaten down on him, and all the rains that had wet his grey cloth cap. His hands, large and gnarled, knew the touch of thousands of letters, of millions of words written by others that he had faithfully delivered throughout his life. He was a man of few words, but the ones he spoke had the weight of certainty, the solidity of someone who has seen much and learned that words are like letters, precious when they are necessary, unnecessary when they say nothing important. That October morning, when the first rays of sun painted the oak leaves golden and the air already carried the anticipated coolness of the winter to come, Martín was on his usual step. The cold reddened his cheeks and made him see small clouds of breath every time he breathed, but he didn't care. He had his hands tucked in the pockets of the coat that had been his father's, a thick wool coat that was too big for him, but that he refused to give up because it still held, or at least he believed it held, a trace of the smell of that man he barely remembered. The sound of Don Aurelio's bicycle was unmistakable, the soft squeaking of the chain, the crunching of the wheels on the gravel, the tinkling of the bell that the mailman rang when he approached houses. Martín heard it before he saw him, as every morning, and his heart gave that little leap it always gave, that mixture of hope and fear that he couldn't name but felt with all the intensity of his 8 years. Don Aurelio appeared at the bend in the road, pedaling with the calm of someone who's in no hurry because he knows he'll arrive when he needs to arrive. Seeing Martín on the porch, as every morning, he raised a hand in greeting, and the boy responded the same way. It was a silent ritual between them, a language of gestures that didn't need words because both understood what it meant. The mailman stopped his bicycle in front of the stone house and got off with the surprising agility of someone who has made the same movement thousands of times. He approached the porch while rummaging in his leather bag, and Martín stood up, his heart beating a little faster than normal. "Good morning, little one," said Don Aurelio, with his deep, calm voice. "I see you're still the earliest riser in town." "Good morning, Don Aurelio," Martín responded, and his eyes automatically searched the mailman's bag, scrutinizing the envelopes that peeked out like unanswered questions. The old man followed the boy's gaze, and something in his expression softened. He knew that look. He had seen it on many faces throughout his life. It was the look of someone waiting for something that may never arrive, but who cannot stop waiting because hope is the last thing to be lost, and sometimes the only thing that remains. "Today I'm bringing the electricity bill for your grandmother," said Don Aurelio, taking out a white envelope, "and a postcard from Mrs. Carmen for Doña Esperanza, who's 2 houses up." Martín nodded, taking the envelope. His fingers brushed the paper, feeling its smooth, cold texture, so different from what he hoped to receive someday. But he said nothing, because he had learned long ago that asking out loud for what you desire doesn't make it arrive sooner, and sometimes it only makes the silence that follows more painful. Don Aurelio observed the boy for a long moment, with that deep gaze of someone who can read faces, like others, read books. There was something in Martín that reminded him of himself as a young man, that mixture of patience and sadness that shouldn't exist in someone so small, but that destiny sometimes imposes without asking permission. "You know, Martín?" said the mailman, sitting on the step next to the boy, with a sigh that spoke of tired bones and accumulated years. "I've spent my whole life carrying letters from one place to another. I've carried good news and bad news. I've carried declarations of love and farewell letters. I've carried words that have changed lives forever." The boy looked at him attentively, because Don Aurelio rarely spoke this much, and when he did, his words always had the weight of something important. "And I've learned one thing in all these years," continued the old man, looking toward the horizon where the mountains were outlined against the sky that was beginning to fill with light. "The most important letters don't always arrive when we expect them. Sometimes they take years, sometimes decades, but when they need to arrive, they arrive. I don't know how or why, but that's how it is. As if the universe had its own mail system, slower but more accurate than ours." Martín didn't respond, but he stored those words in some deep place in his memory, along with the blurry memories of a father who had left and a mother he had never known. He stored them the way valuable things are stored, carefully to be able to take them out when he needed them. Don Aurelio got up with another sigh, adjusted his cap, and got back on his bicycle. Before leaving, he turned toward the boy one last time. "Keep waiting, little one," he said. "Those who wait with a clean heart always receive what they need. Not always what they want, but what they need." And he rode away down the dirt road, the sound of his bicycle gradually fading among the trees until only the silence of the morning and the singing of birds waking in the branches remained. Martín entered the house with the envelope in his hand. Grandmother Elena was already in the kitchen, moving the firewood in the iron stove that heated the whole house and preparing breakfast with those automatic movements of someone who has done the same thing every morning for so many years that they no longer need to think to do it. "Good morning, my boy," she said without turning around, because she knew her grandson's footsteps like she knew the beating of her own heart. "Has Don Aurelio come?" "Yes, grandmother. He brought the electricity bill." Elena turned then, and something in her face changed for an instant, so brief that almost no one would have noticed it. But Martín saw it, because he had learned to read the small signs in his grandmother's face, those fleeting moments when the sadness she kept came to the surface before sinking back down. "Good, good," she said, taking the envelope and leaving it on the table without opening it. "Come, sit down for breakfast. I made porridge with honey, the kind you like." They sat at the dark wooden table that had been in that house since before Elena was born, that had seen family dinners and solitary breakfasts, celebrations and mourning, and that kept in its grain and scratches the history of several generations. Steam rose from the clay bowls, mixing with the golden light that entered through the window, and for a moment everything seemed perfect. One of those moments of peace that remain etched in memory like living photographs. "Grandmother," said Martín after a while, stirring the porridge with his spoon but not eating, "why do letters never arrive for us?" The question hung in the air like a leaf falling slowly from a tree. Elena left her spoon on the table with a careful gesture, as if she needed time to find the right words. "Sometimes letters get lost, my boy," she finally responded, and her voice had that tone that Martín knew well, the tone of someone telling the truth, but not the whole truth. "And sometimes the people who could write to us don't know where to find us. Or they can't write. Or—" She stopped, and Martín saw how her eyes moistened before she blinked quickly and smiled, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes but tried to be comforting. "But that doesn't mean they don't think about us," she continued. "Love doesn't need paper and ink to exist. It exists in the air we breathe, in the memories we keep, in the people we always carry in our hearts, even though they're not with us." Martín nodded, although he wasn't sure he completely understood. There were so many things he didn't understand, so many questions that no one had ever answered for him. Why had his father left when he was only 3 years old? Why had his mother died giving him life? Why did just he and his grandmother live alone in that house at the end of the road, as if the rest of the world had forgotten them? But he had learned that some questions caused his grandmother pain, and he loved her too much to make her suffer. So he kept the questions along with the other things he kept, in that interior space where children who have known abandonment store everything they cannot express. The days passed, as they always pass in small places, with the slowness of a river flowing unhurriedly toward a destination it has known forever. October gave way to November, and the leaves finished falling from the trees, carpeting the roads with gold and brown. The cold settled in the mountains like a guest who has come to stay, and Elena and Martín's wood stove worked day and night to maintain the heat. Every morning, without fail, Martín continued to get up before dawn to sit on his step and wait for Don Aurelio. And every morning the mailman arrived with his squeaking bicycle, exchanged a few words with the boy, and continued on his way, leaving bills, postcards, and occasionally a letter that wasn't for them. But something was changing, although Martín didn't know it yet. Something was moving in the invisible gears of destiny, preparing an encounter that would change his life forever. One afternoon in late November, while helping his grandmother collect the last apples from the orchard before the frosts ruined them, Martín found something buried among the roots of the oldest apple tree. It was a rusty tin box, the size of a shoebox, covered with dirt and dry leaves. "Grandmother, look!" he called, cleaning the dirt from the surface of the box. "What is this?" Elena approached, and when she saw the box, her face paled in a way that Martín had never seen before. She stood motionless for a moment that seemed eternal, her eyes fixed on that object as if it were a ghost that had returned from the past. "That box," she murmured, almost to herself. "I thought I had lost it years ago. Your father buried it there when he was a child to keep his treasures." Martín felt his heart skip a beat. His father. They talked about him so rarely. He knew so little about that man who had left and never returned. He looked at the box with new eyes, as if it suddenly contained not rusty metal, but something infinitely more valuable. "Can we open it?" he asked, almost whispering. Elena hesitated. Martín could see the struggle on her face, the conflict between the desire to protect her grandson from pain and the need to allow him to know even a fragment of his history. "Yes," she finally said. "I think it's time." They entered the house with the box and put it on the kitchen table. The lock was rusty but gave way with a little effort, and when the lid opened, Martín held his breath. Inside was a world in miniature, a collection of childhood treasures that told the story of a boy who no longer existed, of a father that Martín barely remembered. There were colored marbles, some stones polished by the river, bird feathers, a wooden top painted blue, and several faded photographs. But what caught Martín's attention most was a pile of folded papers at the bottom of the box. Letters. Dozens of letters written in a childish handwriting that matured over the years, all addressed to the same person, for Mom in heaven. "Your father wrote these letters to his mother," Elena explained with a trembling voice. "My wife, your grandmother Carmen, died when he was 6 years old. He never got over that loss, never stopped writing to her. He said that if the letters couldn't reach heaven, at least they would be safe under the tree where she used to sit and read." Martín picked up one of the letters with trembling hands. He opened it carefully, as if the paper might disintegrate at the slightest touch, and read the words written by that boy who had been his father. "Dear Mom, today I turned 7, and I miss you very much. Grandmother made me a chocolate cake, but it didn't taste as good as the ones you made. Dad says you're in heaven watching over us, and I believe him, but sometimes I wonder if you can see us from up there. If you can, could you send me a sign, anything, just to know you haven't forgotten me? I love you always, your son, Pedro." Martín finished reading with eyes full of tears. Pedro. His father's name was Pedro. He knew it, of course, but somehow seeing it written in that childish handwriting made it more real, closer. "There's more," said Elena, pointing to the bottom of the box. Under the letters there was something else, a photograph larger than the others wrapped in a silk handkerchief. Martín unwrapped it carefully and found himself looking at a face he didn't know, but that seemed strangely familiar. It was a young woman, with dark hair and eyes the color of honey. She smiled at the camera with a smile that illuminated the entire photograph, and in her arms she held a baby wrapped in a white blanket. "It's your mother," said Eleanor, and her voice broke. "And that baby is you. That photo was taken the day you were born, a few hours before she—" She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Martín understood. He looked at that woman he didn't know, but who had given him life, who had died so he could live, and felt something he couldn't name, but that filled his entire chest. "Her name was Isabel," Elena continued, wiping her tears with her apron. "She was the kindest and sweetest woman I've ever known. Your father loved her with all his heart, and when she died—" He broke. He tried to stay, tried to raise you alone, but the pain was too great. Every time he looked at you, he saw Isabel in your eyes, and that destroyed him." "Is that why he left?" Martín asked with a thread of a voice. "Yes, my boy. He left because love sometimes hurts so much you can't bear it. He left because he thought you would be better off without him, without his sadness, without his pain. He was wrong, of course. But sometimes the people who love us most are the ones who make the worst decisions, precisely because they love us too much." Martín remained silent for a long while, processing everything he had discovered. His father hadn't abandoned him because he didn't love him. He had left him because he loved him too much and didn't know how to handle it. It wasn't much consolation, but it was something. It was more than he had had before. "Do you know where he is now?" he finally asked. Elena slowly shook her head. "No, my boy. It's been 5 years since I've heard anything from him. The last letter I received came from a city in the south, but when I tried to respond, the letter came back unopened. He had moved without leaving an address. Since then, silence." That night, Martín couldn't sleep. He lay looking at the ceiling of his room, thinking about everything he had discovered. He had a photograph of his mother. He had his father's childhood letters. He had more pieces of the puzzle of his history, but the most important piece was still missing: his father himself. And then, while the full moon illuminated his room through the window, Martín made a decision. If his father had written letters to his dead mother, hoping they would somehow reach heaven, then he could also write letters. Not to heaven, but to his father, wherever he was. Perhaps the universe had its own mail system, as Don Aurelio had said. Perhaps, if he wrote with a sufficiently clean heart, his words would find the way. The next morning, after sitting on his step and watching Don Aurelio pass by, Martín entered the house and looked for paper and pencil. He sat at the kitchen table, bit the end of the pencil, thinking about what to say, and finally began to write. "Dear Dad, my name is Martín, and I'm 8 years old. I don't know if you remember me because I was very small when you left. Grandmother Elena takes care of me and loves me very much. But sometimes I feel lonely and wonder where you are. Yesterday I found the box you buried under the apple tree when you were a child. I read your letters to your mom in heaven, and I understood that you also knew what it's like to miss someone. I'm not angry at you for leaving. Grandmother explained to me that sometimes love hurts so much you can't bear it, and I think I understand a little. I also think a lot about my mom, even though I didn't know her, and sometimes my chest hurts from thinking so much. But I want you to know that if you ever want to come back, I'll be waiting for you. I wait for you every morning when the mailman comes, even though I know you probably won't come. But waiting doesn't cost me anything, and it makes me feel like somehow we're connected. Love, your son Martín." When he finished writing, Martín folded the letter carefully, put it in an envelope he found in his grandmother's drawer, and wrote on the outside, "For my dad Pedro, wherever he is." He had no address to send it to, but that didn't matter. He hid the envelope under his pillow, and that night he slept better than he had slept in a long time. And if you have also ever waited for a letter that changed your life, tell me in the comments. The days continued to pass, and Martín continued writing letters. One every week, sometimes more when he had many things to tell. He wrote to him about school, about the friends he didn't have, about the books he read, about the stories his grandmother told him by the fire. He wrote to him about the snow that began to fall in December, covering Valdecumbres with a white blanket that made everything seem new and clean. He wrote to him about the Christmas they spent alone, he and his grandmother, with a small tree decorated with ornaments that had been in the family for generations. He kept all the letters under his pillow, a growing pile of envelopes without addresses that represented everything he wanted to say to a father who might never read them. Don Aurelio noticed the change in Martín. The boy continued to wait for him every morning, but there was something different in his gaze, a light that wasn't there before. One afternoon, while delivering a package to a nearby house, the mailman stopped to talk to him longer than usual. "I see you differently, little one," he observed, leaning on his bicycle. "Calmer, perhaps. Has something happened?" Martín hesitated for a moment, and then, not quite knowing why, decided to tell him his secret. "I'm writing letters," he said. "Letters for my father. I don't know where to send them, but I write them anyway." Don Aurelio didn't seem surprised. He nodded slowly, as if that made all the sense in the world. "Letters don't need to be sent to have power," he said. "The simple act of writing them, of putting into words what we feel, is already a kind of magic. Those words exist now. They're in the world, and somehow they'll find their way." "Do you really believe that?" Martín asked. "I believe many things that most people would consider nonsense," the old man responded with a smile that wrinkled his face even more. "I believe that letters have souls. I believe that every word written with the heart has the power to change something, even if we don't know what or when. I believe that nothing is truly lost, that everything we put into the world somehow comes back to us." That conversation stayed with Martín for a long time, and he continued writing, letter after letter, week after week, while winter gave way to a timid spring that was beginning to show itself among the melting snows. It was one April morning when everything changed. Martín was on his usual step, enjoying the first real warmth of the year, when he saw Don Aurelio's bicycle appear at the bend in the road. But there was something different about the mailman that morning. He was pedaling faster than usual, and when he got closer, Martín could see that on his face was an expression he had never seen before. It was a mixture of contained emotion and something like anticipation. "Good morning, Martín," said Don Aurelio, and his voice had a barely perceptible tremor. "I have something for you today." Martín's heart skipped a beat. He had heard those words thousands of times in his imagination, but he had never expected to actually hear them. Don Aurelio rummaged in his leather bag more carefully than usual, as if what he was looking for was something fragile and precious. He finally pulled out an envelope. It was different from the others, thicker, more worn, as if it had travelled far before reaching its destination, and on the front, written in handwriting that trembled slightly, it said, "For Martín, the son of Pedro, in Valdecumbre." Martín took the envelope with hands that trembled as much as the sender's handwriting. He looked at Don Aurelio with eyes that were already beginning to fill with tears. Is it from my father?" The mailman nodded, and Martín could see that he too had moist eyes. "It arrived this morning at the post office in the big town," he explained. "It had gone around so many times before arriving that the envelope is almost falling apart. But it arrived. Important letters always arrive, remember." Martín wanted to open it immediately, right there, but something stopped him. He needed to share this moment with someone else. "I'm going to get my grandmother," he said, and ran into the house. Elena was in the kitchen preparing breakfast like every morning. When she saw her grandson enter with the envelope in his hand and tears running down his cheeks, she immediately knew what had happened. She brought her hands to her chest, as if she needed to contain something that threatened to overflow. "Is it from Pedro?" she asked with a trembling voice. Martín nodded, unable to speak. He approached his grandmother, and together they sat at the table where so many mornings they had breakfasted in silence, where so many unspoken words had floated in the air between them. With trembling fingers, Martín opened the envelope. Inside were several sheets of paper written on both sides with handwriting that began firm but became more trembling as it progressed, as if the author had been struggling against his own emotions while writing. "Read it aloud," Elena asked. "Please." Martín took a deep breath, wiped his tears with his pajama sleeve, and began to read. "Dear Martín, my son, I don't know how to begin this letter because there are no words that can explain or justify what I did. I abandoned you. I abandoned the only son I had left from the woman I loved most in my life, and there is no excuse for that. But I'm going to try to explain to you, not so you'll forgive me, but so you'll understand. When your mother died, something inside me broke. Isabel was my light, my reason for getting up every morning, my home when I had no house, and suddenly she was gone. And you were there, with her same eyes, with her same smile, looking at me as if you expected me to know what to do, as if you expected me to be capable of raising you alone when I wasn't even capable of taking care of myself. Every time I looked at you, I saw Isabel, and the pain was so great, I couldn't breathe. I thought that if I left you with my mother, who had always been stronger and wiser than me, you would be better off. I thought my pain would contaminate you, that my sadness would drown you, that you would be happier without a broken father than with one who could only offer you tears. I was wrong. I knew it almost immediately after leaving. But by then I had already distanced myself so much that I didn't know how to return. The shame was too great. How could I look you in the eyes and tell you I had abandoned you because I loved you too much? How could I ask you to forgive me for something I couldn't even forgive myself? So I kept running. I traveled from city to city, working at whatever I found, trying to escape from myself. But no matter how far I went, you were always with me. In my dreams, in my thoughts, in the face of every child I saw on the street. I carried you everywhere without taking you anywhere. A few months ago, I got sick. Nothing serious, but enough to make me think about life and death, about what I've done and what I've failed to do. And while I was in that hospital alone, looking at the white ceiling of a room that wasn't my home, I made a decision. I had to write to you. I had to try to explain. I had to tell you that not a single day went by without me thinking about you, without me wondering what you would be like, what you would like, if you would be happy. I don't know if this letter will arrive. I don't know if you'll want to read it. I don't know if you'll ever be able to forgive me, and I'm not asking you to. What I am asking is that you know I love you. I've loved you from the moment you were born. When I held you in my arms, and your mother smiled at me from the hospital bed, so tired but so happy. I loved you when I left, even if it didn't seem like it. And I love you now, as I write these words that should have arrived years ago. If you ever want to meet me, if you ever want to know who the man is who gave you life and then disappeared, I'll be waiting. I've returned to Spain. I'm in a coastal town. It's called Aguamar, working in a carpentry shop. It's not much, but it's honest, and it allows me to think about you while I work the wood with my hands. I don't expect you to come. I don't expect you to write to me. I don't expect anything because I don't deserve to expect anything. But if someday, by some miracle, you decide to give me a chance, I'll be here, waiting, as I should have waited 8 years ago. Love always, even though I don't deserve it. Your father, Pedro. P.S. Along with this letter, you'll find something I've kept all these years. It's the first drawing you made when you were barely 2 years old. Colorful scribbles that don't represent anything, but for me they represented everything. I've carried it with me everywhere, on all my trips, in all my escapes. It's the only thing I had left of you, and now I'm returning it to you. It's yours. It was always yours. Martín left the letter on the table, with hands that no longer trembled. The tears continued to fall, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of something more complex, something that had to do with relief and hope and pain and love, all mixed in a flow he couldn't contain. At the bottom of the envelope, he found the drawing, a yellowed paper with colored lines, circles and stripes that didn't form anything recognizable, but somehow formed everything. He held it carefully, imagining a man alone in a hospital room, looking at those scribbles and thinking about the son he had left behind. Elena cried silently, with her hands still on her chest. When Martín looked at her, she extended her arms, and he took refuge in her embrace, as he had done so many times when he was younger, and the world seemed too big and too confusing. "What do you want to do?" Elena asked after a long while, when both had regained some composure. Martín didn't hesitate. "I want to write to him. I want to tell him I received his letter, and I want to meet him." Elena nodded, although her eyes reflected an ancient fear, the fear of a grandmother who has raised her grandson like a son, and who now has to share him with someone who abandoned him years ago. "If that's what you want, I'll help you," she said. "But promise me one thing." "What thing?" "Promise me you'll go slowly, that you won't expect too much all at once, that you'll give him time and give yourself time. Rebuilding something that broke takes time, my boy, a lot of time," Martín promised. That same afternoon, he sat down to write the most important letter of his life. But this time, unlike all the previous ones, he knew exactly where to send it. "Dear Dad, I received your letter. Grandmother read it with me, and we both cried a lot, but not from sadness. Well, a little from sadness, yes, but also from other things I don't know how to explain. Thank you for writing to me. Thank you for telling me the truth, and thank you for keeping my drawing all these years, even though they're just silly scribbles. I also have something of yours. I found the box you buried under the apple tree when you were a child, with the letters you wrote to your mom in heaven. I read them all, and I think I understand you a little better now. You also knew what it was like to miss someone, right? I want to meet you. I want to know what you're like, what you like, what things you do in the carpentry shop. I want you to tell me things about my mom, because grandmother has told me some, but I know you knew her in a different way. And I want to show you Valdecumbres, because it's very beautiful and I think you would like it. But grandmother says I have to go slowly, and she's right. So for now, I'm just writing you this letter to tell you yes, that I want a chance, and that I'll be waiting too. Love, your son Martín." Don Aurelio personally took the letter to the post office in the big town, making sure it was sent with tracking so it wouldn't get lost. When he passed by Martín's house the next day, the boy was waiting for him as always, but this time with a smile that illuminated his entire face. "Thank you," Martín said, "for everything, for bringing me the letter, for all the mornings you've kept me company, for believing that important letters always arrive." Don Aurelio smiled, a smile that wrinkled all the wrinkles on his face and made his tired eyes shine. "Don't thank me, little one, I just do my job. Letters travel on their own, I just give them a hand from time to time." The weeks that followed were the longest of Martín's life. Every morning he sat on his step waiting, but now his wait had a different purpose. He no longer waited for something vague and undefined, a sign from a ghost father. Now he waited for a concrete answer, a letter that would tell him if his father had received his words and what he had felt upon reading them. The answer arrived 3 weeks later, on a rainy May day when the sky seemed to want to wash the mountains with its tears. Don Aurelio appeared, with his raincoat dripping with water, but his eyes shone so much that Martín immediately knew he was bringing good news. "Something arrived for you," he said, taking an envelope from inside his jacket, where he had protected it from the rain. Martín took it with eager hands. This time the envelope was thicker than the previous one, as if it contained more than words. And indeed, when he opened it, he found not only a letter, but also several photographs. The photos showed a middle-aged man with dark hair beginning to grey and eyes that Martín immediately recognized as his own. In one of the photos, he was next to a carpenter's bench, smiling at the camera with the shyness of someone not used to smiling. In another, he held a carved wooden object that looked like a small boat. And in the third, the one that impacted Martín most, he was seen sitting on what appeared to be a beach, looking at the sea with a pensive expression. The letter said, "Dear Martín, I can't describe what I felt when I read your letter. I think I spent a whole hour crying, alone in my small apartment, with your words in my hands. Letters from my childhood, you say. You found them. I never thought they would still be there after so many years. How strange and how wonderful time is, isn't it? It keeps things we thought were lost to return them when we need them most. I'm sending you some photos, so you know what I look like now. I've changed a lot since I was young. I have more grey hair and more wrinkles, but the eyes are the same. Your eyes, your mother's eyes. You ask me about the carpentry shop. It's a small place. It smells of freshly cut wood and varnish, and it makes me happy to work there. I make furniture mainly, but I also carve figures. The boat you see in the photo I made thinking of you, hoping to be able to give it to you someday. It's made of oak, like the trees of Valdecumbres, and it has your name engraved on the hull. You also ask me about your mother. There's so much to tell I don't know where to start. She was cheerful. That's the first thing I remember about her. She had a laugh that filled any room, that made everything seem better just because she was there. She liked to sing while cooking, although she didn't sing very well, and she liked to read before sleeping, always with a cup of tea in her hand. She loved you so much. She talked about you all the time when you were in her womb. She made plans. She daydreamed about what you would be like, what things you would like, who you would become. When you were born, I saw her so happy I thought her heart would burst with love. I didn't know she would only have a few hours to enjoy that happiness. I want to meet you, Martín. I want to see who you've become, what things you like, what your laugh sounds like. But I also understand that this has to go at your pace, not mine. I've lost the right to ask you for anything, so I'll wait as long as you need, and while I wait, I'll continue carving wooden boats and thinking about you. With all my love, your father Pedro." Martín read the letter 3 times before storing it with the previous ones. Then he looked at the photographs for a long while, memorizing every detail of his father's face. He was right. The eyes were the same. His eyes. His mother's eyes. The letters continued to travel between Valdecumbres and Aguamar during the following months. Martín wrote about his life, about school, about his friends. He had started to make some since he no longer felt so alone. About the walks he took with his grandmother through the mountains, about the books he read and the dreams he had. Pedro wrote about his work, about the wooden figures he carved, about the beach he went to every afternoon to watch the sunset, about the memories of Isabel he kept like treasures, and little by little, letter by letter, they began to know each other. Not as father and son, not yet, but as 2 people who discover each other mutually, who find unexpected connections, who build bridges over the abyss of years of silence. Don Aurelio continued to carry the letters back and forth with the dedication of always, but now there was something different in his way of doing it. There was a special gleam in his eyes when he delivered an envelope to Martín, a deep satisfaction that came from knowing he was being part of something important, of a reconciliation story that was being written letter by letter. It was in August, when the sun fell mercilessly on Valdecumbre, and the cicadas sang tirelessly in the trees, when the most important letter of all arrived. Dear Martín, I've been thinking a lot these days, and I think the time has come to ask you something. Would you like us to see each other? I don't mean living together or anything that big. Just seeing each other, meeting in person, being able to hug you even once. Your grandmother and I have also been writing to each other. I hope you don't mind. And she invited me to spend a few days in Valdecumbre. She says the house is small, but there's plenty of room for one more, and it would be good if we met in your territory, where you feel safe. If you want, of course. If you don't want to, I'll understand. We'll keep writing as we have been, and I'll wait until you're ready. But if you want, I'll be there next week. With all my love, your father. Martín didn't need to think about it. He ran to find his grandmother, who was in the garden picking tomatoes, and showed her the letter with hands trembling with excitement. "You wrote to him?" he asked. "Without telling me?" Elena smiled, with that wise smile that grandmothers who have lived a lot and learned that sometimes you have to give little pushes to destiny have. "Someone had to do it, my boy. Letters are all well and good, but there comes a time when written words aren't enough. There comes a time when you have to look each other in the eyes, embrace, know if the other is real or just a dream of paper." "And have you forgiven him?" Martín asked. "For leaving?" Elena remained silent for a moment, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. Forgiveness is something complicated, Martín. It's not something you give all at once, like a gift wrapped in shiny paper. It's something you build, day by day, gesture by gesture. Have I completely forgiven him? Maybe not yet, but I'm on the way, and most importantly, I want to continue on that path. I want to reach the end of forgiveness, because I know something good awaits me there, something that will heal us all. The week that followed was the longest Martín remembered. Each day seemed to last an eternity. Each hour dragged as if time itself were playing with him. He helped his grandmother prepare the guest room, clean the house from top to bottom, cook enough food to feed an army. And finally, the day arrived. Martín was on his step from before dawn, but this time he wasn't waiting for the mailman. He was waiting for a bus that was coming from the coast, a bus that would bring his father back to the mountains where he had grown up, to the house where he was born, to the son he had left behind. The bus arrived mid-morning, stopping in the town square with a screech of brakes that made Martín's heart leap. He saw several people get off, an elderly couple, a woman with a baby, a young man with a backpack, and then the last one off, a dark-haired man with grey hair, honey-coloured eyes, and a small suitcase in one hand. Their gazes met across the square, and although there were meters of distance between them, although there were years of absence and unspoken words, although there was an ocean of pain and hope and fear, in that moment all of that stopped mattering. There remained only a father and a son, seeing each other for the first time as the adults they had become, and the boy who had always been waiting. Martín broke into a run. He crossed the square without thinking, without calculating, without measuring. And Pedro dropped his suitcase and opened his arms, and when they met, it was as if all the letters in the world had melted into a single embrace, as if all the words written for months had become warmth and tears and the beating of two hearts finding each other again. "Dad," said Martín, and it was the first time he pronounced that word, directed at someone real, someone of flesh and blood, who held him in his arms. "My boy," Pedro responded, and his voice broke into 1,000 pieces that immediately reconstructed themselves, because sometimes breaking is the only way to rebuild. "My Martín, forgive me. Forgive me for everything." "I've already forgiven you," said Martín, and he discovered it was true, that at some point during all those months of letters, forgiveness had arrived without him realizing it. Silent and natural like leaves that sprout in spring. Elena observed the scene from the doorway of the house, with her hands pressed against her chest and tears running freely down her wrinkled cheeks. And when Pedro looked up and saw her, when their eyes met over the head of the boy he was holding, something passed between them too, something that had to do with acceptance and time and the understanding that love takes different forms throughout life but never completely disappears. The days that followed were like a dream come true, but a calm dream, without hurry, without the urgency of trying to recover all the lost time at once. Pedro explored every corner of the house where he had grown up, rediscovered the landscapes of his childhood, shared meals and conversations and silences with his mother and his son. He showed Martín the portable carpentry workshop he had brought with him, taught him to carve small wooden figures, told him stories about Isabel that made them laugh and cry at the same time. And Martín showed him his secret places, the corners of the forest where he liked to sit and read, the river where he fished with a stick and a string, although he never caught anything. One afternoon, while walking together on the path that led to the old apple tree, Pedro stopped and looked at his son with a seriousness that made Martín know something important was coming. "There's something I need to tell you," he began. "Something I've been thinking about since I arrived." Martín waited, his heart beating a little faster than normal. "I'm not going back to Aguamar," Pedro said. "I've talked to your grandmother, and if you agree, I'd like to stay here. Not in the house. I don't want to invade your space. There's a small cabin on the other side of town that's for rent, and I could set up my workshop there. That way, I'd be close, but not too close. We could see each other every day, but you would also have your privacy. And little by little, with time, perhaps—" He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. Martín understood. Little by little, with time, perhaps they could become a real family. Not the family they should have been, because that was no longer possible, but a new family built on the foundations of what remained, of what they had saved, of what they had rebuilt, letter by letter. "I would like that very much," Martín said. "I would like that very much." And that's how Pedro returned to Valdecumbres to stay. The cabin was small but cozy, and soon the smell of wood and varnish mixed with the aroma of the pine trees that surrounded it. The neighbors, who at first looked with suspicion at the prodigal son, who had abandoned his family, gradually softened over time, seeing how hard he tried, how he worked, how every day he built a little more of the bridge that united him with his son. And Martín continued to get up every morning to sit on his step and wait for the mailman. But now the waiting was different. He no longer waited for something he didn't know if it would arrive. Now he waited because he liked it, because it was his ritual, because Don Aurelio had become a friend, and because mornings on the porch were a moment of peace before the day began. 1 year after that first letter arrived, on an April morning exactly like the one that had changed everything, Don Aurelio appeared at the bend in the road with his squeaking bicycle. But this time he brought something different. It wasn't an envelope, but a small package wrapped in brown paper. "This is for you," he said, handing it to Martín with a mysterious smile. "From someone special." Martín frowned, confused. He opened the package carefully, and inside found a carved wooden object. It was a miniature mailbox, perfectly made, with a little door that opened and everything. And inside the mailbox was a tiny letter, folded so many times it was barely bigger than a stamp. The letter said, "For the boy who waited for the mailman every morning, from his father who learned that the most important letters are the ones you carry in your heart. I love you. I've always loved you. And I always will love you." Martín looked up toward the road that led to his father's cabin, and there he was, leaning on the fence, smiling with that shy smile that Martín had learned to love over the past year. He waved at him, and Martín waved back, pressing the small wooden mailbox against his chest. Eleanor came out to the porch at that moment, attracted by the sound of voices, and saw her grandson with the gift in his hands, and her son in the distance. And she knew, without anyone telling her, that everything was well, that everything that had been broken had been rebuilt, perhaps not as before, but in a new and different way that was also beautiful. Don Aurelio observed the scene for a moment, with that deep gaze of someone who has seen much in life and knows how to recognize happy endings when he has them in front of him. Then he tipped his cap in a farewell gesture and got back on his bicycle. "Important letters always arrive," he murmured to himself as he rode away down the road. "Sooner or later they always arrive." And so this story ends, but it doesn't really end, because stories of love and forgiveness and families that reunite never end completely. They remain alive in every shared glance, in every embrace, in every morning that begins with the hope of something good to come. Martín continued to wait for the mailman every morning, not because he needed to receive anything, but because some habits become part of who you are. Pedro continued carving wooden figures in his small workshop, and each of them told a story. The story of a father who got lost and found himself, who fled and returned, who broke and rebuilt. And Elena, the grandmother who had held everything together during the most difficult years, could finally rest. Not from tiredness, but from relief. The relief of seeing that her family, so fragmented for so long, was complete again. If this story accompanied you today, give us a like and share this tale with whoever needs a ray of hope, because we all carry inside a child who is waiting for something. And we all have letters that need to be written and others that need to be read. And all of us, in one way or another, are mailmen who carry messages from one heart to another, messages of love and hope and forgiveness that travel through time and space until they find their destiny. Important letters always arrive, always.